My name is Tim Draymond, and I'm the Executive Director of Social Innovation Generation and a co-host for this evening's event. I just want to let people know that we have a wall there that's covering the Twitter feed, and that the hashtag for today will be at MaRSGL. Or sorry, at MaRSGL. Hashtag MaRSGL. Thank you. I do tweet, by the way. Now, over the course of the last 4 years, SIG has partnered with MaRS Global Speaker Series to bring many inspirational speakers to this space, speakers who have deepened our understanding of social innovation and who have called us to action to solve some of society's most complex social challenges. Our final 2013 speaker was the MaRS CEO, Dr. Ilse Truenig, who clearly articulates the imperative that we as a country need to embed social innovation into our national innovation agenda. Next month, we have another speaker introducing Toronto and indeed Canada to the latest thinking about the dramatic growth of collaborative consumption and the sharing economy, because we're hosting a cross-country tour by April Rinne from San Francisco's Collaborative Lab. If you've ever used Airbnb, AutoShare, or Zipcar, you will have some knowledge of the sharing economy and what a disruptive innovation it is becoming for urban economies. We will make sure you all get an invitation to the event soon. Flyers outside further illustrate our spring event offerings. Be sure you take one with you. Tonight's speaker will be dutifully provocative. This is the first time Canada gets to hear from the director of the MaRS Solutions Lab, Joeri van den Steenhoven. He is addressing how he sees innovative systems change happen and how the Solutions Lab at MaRS, one of Canada's pioneering cross-sector lab programs, will try and accelerate progress towards generating and implementing solutions to complex challenges. Joining Joeri to moderate a discussion at the conclusion of his presentation will be one of Toronto's most experienced journalists working to tell the compelling stories about our city's most pressing social challenges through her regular reports on CBC's Metro Morning. Mary Wien's reportage includes groundbreaking series such as Joyless Commute, which explores the emotional strain of the daily commute and the indignity of aging. Mary's passion for the city is also expressed in her work as a community volunteer. She is one of the founding members of Roncesvalles Renewed and Ronci Works, where she works on local initiatives that help build a sense of citizenship and civic engagement. Mary is the ideal moderator for tonight's discussion. But first, we welcome Joeri. Before joining MaRS, Joeri was co-founder and CEO of Knowledge Land, one of the leading change labs in the Netherlands and Europe. He has also worked as a director at the Young Foundation in the United Kingdom. As a social entrepreneur, he has designed and realized numerous successful interventions for social innovation and has developed methods and networks for creating systems change. Joeri is also a member of the board of directors of the Lisbon Council, one of Europe's leading think tanks on innovation and growth. In recent years, when Canadians have sought to deepen our understanding of design labs or social innovation labs, our search for insights often has taken us to Europe. That continent has pioneered building novel approaches and multi-sector safe space incubators for risk and experimentation. Now we have one of Europe's leading minds here with us at MaRS, not just building new lab scaffolding, but contributing to the leading-edge Canadian architecture for solving critical challenges. I very much look forward to hearing from Joeri, and will you please join with me in welcoming him to the stage right now. Thank you.
Good evening. Before I start, I want to thank a couple of people as well, because I'm deeply honored to be here, not just with you tonight, but also be here in Toronto as director of the MaRS Solutions Lab. And I would not be here without 4 women. And those 4 women I want to thank. And this, first of all, it's Jill Evans, who is one of my greatest advisors of the MaRS Solutions Lab, and without whose support of her and her family and her father, Dr. John Evans, in my mind, one of the greatest social innovators that this country has brought forward, and the co-founder of MaRS. And without his and Jill's support, I would not be here today. And I wouldn't be here today either without Alison Hewitt and Ilse Trunicht reeling me in here. It started with a LinkedIn message from Alison. I vividly remember a lunch at Ilse's home convincing me that I really had to come over to join MaRS, and what a pleasure it has been. And finally, Ines, my wife, for allowing to go and for joining and supporting me on this great adventure. It's been an adventure, very much so. So thank you, and maybe a hand for these 4 women. So I would like to share some of my thoughts in about the next 30 minutes. I hope I can keep it within those 30 minutes on systems change, why we need it, and how to do it. But first, a little history. This picture appeared in the newspapers around the world yesterday, 45 years ago. And it inspired David Bowie to write Space Oddity with the line, "Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do." And that is exactly how we often feel when we see systems. We feel powerless. We see the vulnerability of the system, but we don't see means how to change them. Although there is definitely a clear need to do so. And we are surrounded by systems. The water system, economic system, the transport systems. There are many systems that influence our life and that we could not live our lives without. So how do we relate ourselves to those systems? How do we change them? And how do we improve them? And why do we need to do that? These systems are changing, sometimes you could say by themselves, but often as the result of human actions, because systems are interconnected and interdependent patterns of action involving many institutions, and I would say nowadays, because this is the official definition of a system, but I would say that next to institutions, it's also people. Who of you has been born between 1969 and 1989? So I have this question to you. What will be our generation's legacy? Take 2 minutes, and if you're not from this generation, maybe think about that question too. Take 2 minutes with your neighbor and discuss what will be our generation's legacy with regard to systems. I'll get back to you in a minute. Well, I could just stand back and have you have a good conversation. I would be totally fine with that, by the way. But that's good. Maybe this is the start of a conversation. I just hope to provide some inspiration. Let me share you what I think what our legacy will be. The transition to the knowledge society. How will we manage the transition from an industrial society to a knowledge society? What kind of knowledge society do we want? That will define our legacy. Are we doing that in a right way or in a wrong way? Let's go back to 1969. So we had the picture in January of Apollo 8 of Earth. A couple of months later, David Bowie's song came out, and in July, Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. This was the heyday, you could say, of industrial society. This innovation was largely government-led. John F. Kennedy's famous moon speech in 1961, which was a response to the Russians going to space. So this was very much a government affair. But the real thing why 1969 was a revolutionary year was not Woodstock, which happened in August, but was Leonard Kleinrock. Because Leonard Kleinrock, on the evening of October 21st, 9:30 p.m., sent the first file from one computer to the other, and the internet was born. Also a government-funded project, by the way. So 1969 was a truly revolutionary year. And leap forward to 1989, the other year which defines the generation, the transition generation as I see it, was a very year full of change as well. If you think we are seeing change around us a lot now, well, 1989, in June, the students in China rose up and demanded more freedom and were brutally actually put down on June 4th. In July, South African President Botha went to see Nelson Mandela for the very first time, and 8 months later he was released, and the system of apartheid would be abolished. And in November, the Berlin Wall fell, abolishing the communist system. And all before that, but in the same year, Tim Berners-Lee got approved a proposal in CERN, Switzerland, to start something called the World Wide Web. And the internet, before that a military and academic project, became a public infrastructure. And in that time, we are seeing the rise of the knowledge society, where, as Peter Drucker said, the basic economic resource is knowledge, no longer capital, land, or labor, which are all in transition, by the way. Look at the financial crisis. Look at the ecological crisis that we're facing. And look at the crisis of labor that we see in many systems as well. But we live now in a time which is driven by the application of knowledge to work, which we tend to call innovation. That's the world we live in. I could give you lots of stats on that, but I think you'll know that that is the time that we live in. And Carlota Perez wrote a wonderful book about this, trying to understand these transitions, these really large-scale systems transitions. And what she found is that it was often driven by technology and by key technologies, and she's throughout history has seen these systems transformations, and which always would start with an installation period of 20 to 30 years, where a new technology, in this case ICT, is being introduced to society and is finding its way, until we rise to a point where it is really hurting the traditional systems and basically making sure that those systems do not longer function unless we radically redesign and change them. And there's recession. There's institutional crisis. And that is basically the turning point in the transition, and that's exactly where we are at now. In 2002, she wrote that book, and she predicted that within the next 5 to 10 years, we would see a collapse of the financial sector in 2002. It happened in 2008. Very fascinating book. So we really need to look at our systems that we've created, because what we've seen is that the systems that we've created altogether, the health system, education system, our energy system, is not longer able to match the complexity of the challenges that we face. So what are we going to do to change those systems, and how are we doing that? Because if we don't, we will see increasing tensions because of that transition. For instance, a tension which is generational. A young generation, which is very much part of that knowledge society, who have temporary jobs or are self-employed, and an older generation, which are in steady jobs with all the benefits who come from that. That is a tension we need to address, which comes from this transition to a knowledge society. Technological, geographical, some urban hotspots which are very thriving in this knowledge economy, whereas there are also parts of the world which are disconnected. Educational, much more so today, your education depends on your ability to earn an income, to have a good life. And that distinction between your level of education is actually what causes a lot of tension around, for instance, the political system. So what kind of knowledge society do we want? That's the question I think that our generation, has to answer. And we have to do that in a time where the main instrument that we normally would use to address those questions is the government. And we see a decrease of the problem-solving capacity of that government. It becomes much more difficult to attract and retain people. And I think that is much more so in Europe than here, even. In the Netherlands, the predictions are that in 15 to 20 years, the public sector will have about 40% of the people that they will have today. So how do we uphold a public sector, a health system, education system, with only 40% of the people? Teachers, nurses, doctors, civil servants. You can only do that if you really fundamentally redesign the system. It will not be that bad here, I think, in Canada, but still, we will feel aging in the next decades. There are less public resources due to the financial crisis to solve these complex challenges. And government is still operating in these industrial structures, vertically, in silos. On the other hand, if we look at society, problem-solving capacity is actually on a record high. People are better educated and better informed, and many want to be engaged. I was teaching social change at Harvard Business School beginning of December, and it really struck me that if even the business student want to know about social change because they want to be engaged. There's more private capital for social good than ever before in history. And technology enables us to collaborate and perform really complex tasks horizontally. And the question is, how do we bring those two together? Government and the problem-solving capacity that is in society. And that is, I think, where labs come in. And that was my big learning when I started a think tank called Knowledge Land in 1999. We started off as a think tank, doing some research, writing a report, telling the government what they should do differently. But very quickly on, we realized, but that in a knowledge society, it doesn't work like that. Government cannot solve these challenges on their own. We have to organize society to do it together. We have to become a lab instead of a think tank. So to give two quick examples, we started the digital playgrounds, which initially the government asked us to give a report on how to fight the digital divide. And they asked for a plan to start 15 centers. And what we said to them is, well, we will not write you a plan to start 15 centers. Give us that money and we'll try to build a network of 250 centers with the same amount of money. By opening up the process, by using the creativity and the commitment of community organizations and neighborhood organizations, by asking the corporate sector to help out. We went to Microsoft asking if they could donate free software for these centers. We went to IBM to ask if they could support the buildup of these centers. And in 4 years' time, with the same amount of money that the government wanted to build 15 centers, we built 435, reaching 800,000 people training digital media skills. This new approach can be very effective, but how to do it and how to apply it, we're still learning. One of the other examples is the Kafka Brigade, where initially we wrote a report to the government on how they could organize themselves more effectively, less vertical structured, less siloed, much more integrated from a user perspective, really redesigning public services from the citizen's perspective instead of institutional perspectives. And then we realized a report doesn't bring change. We have to organize it itself. So we started the Kafka Brigade, which became a team of consultants, researchers, activists, which helped the government to find and fight red tape and redesign public services from a user perspective. And that is, I think, the type of interventions that labs do. And their strengths of these social innovation labs or change labs or design labs is a couple. First of all, is having a systems perspective instead of an institutional perspective. A lot of agencies look at problems from their own institution. Labs, if they do their work well, are committed to the challenge, not the institution. Give a quick example. With the GAFRA Brigade, one of the cases that we did, for instance, was a small retail owner who had to ask 17 permits in order to start a business from the city of Amsterdam. A health permit, a fire permit, an environmental permit, and on and on. And basically, each of those 17 permits made total sense for the 17 institutions involved. But the total effect, of course, was something that we don't want. And it was a lot of red tape. Having that system perspective is very useful. And understanding the user, starting to redesign those systems really from a user perspective and involving the users directly into the process. And allowing for a process of ideation and prototyping involving different stakeholders instead of developing solutions for society, developing solutions with society. And be in it for the long term. That is also, we intend to work on the challenges that I will tell a bit more about later on, to work on it really for the next 5 to 10 years. Because these are really complex challenges, and we cannot fix them easily. There are also some pitfalls for labs. One of them is being, well, we do all kinds of nice projects, and we're very happy with ourselves, but we do not scale. We always, everything what we do, we have to have in mind that it is a deliberate process towards scaling. If we want to change systems, we cannot do that without scaling. Secondly, we never have all the knowledge in place. So we have to learn. And if there's a lack of learning, if we start to behave like consultants, coming in and giving the answer straight away, we'll probably fail. So mostly it's about organizing a learning process for the stakeholders and users involved and trying to find out together how we can bring about successful change. Thirdly, a lab process is not just about brainstorming, having some nice ideas and a really good feeling in a hip part of town. It's doing the hard work of really going to action. It has to go beyond the brainstorming and don't stay inside the safety of the lab. So, and for me, a lab is not just a process, but a team committed to bringing about change. And that's hard work, it's failure, it's sweating, it's meeting resistance, it's frustration sometimes, but still going on and believing in what you're doing. So that's why with the MaRS Solutions Lab, our mission is to help solve some of these complex societal challenges that require systems change. So how are we going to do that? Well, basically, we follow the lab process, which starts with an hypothesis of what the problem might be or an idea, and then you research that idea. And you try to understand it better. And that leads to ideas for possible solutions. And you test those ideas on a small scale. Do they work or not? You evaluate, you maybe tweak them, and what works you try to scale, you bring to the market. And basically, what we try to do with the MaRS Solutions Lab is translate that lab process and now apply that to solving complex social challenges. And that starts with defining the problem, which is an iterative process. And probably your first problem definition will not be your last. And then go through a process of really co-creation, which starts with first understanding the user and looking at the problem from a user perspective, and then go through a process of ideation involving stakeholders and users together to come up with new ideas, new possible interventions that could change systems in the directions that you wanted. And I do not believe in a magic bullet, in one intervention changing a system. It's probably going to take a lot of interventions to bring about successful systems change. And then we have to prototype that in the real world. And that's when the real hard work starts. To really do it But not just do it, but learn from it, change it, redesign it, and then try to scale it. And in order to especially move from prototyping to scaling, we need to do two other things. Because what I've seen in my experience in being in this field for 12 to 14 years now is that I've seen a lot of processes stop after the co-creation. And then we just have, basically, just like a think tank, we have a report with a bunch of very nice ideas as a result of some very inspirational meetings and brainstorms, but it's still only paper. And sometimes we get one step further and we have an excellent prototype, and we're all very, very proud, but we fail to get to scale. So that is really one of the questions that is in my mind. How do we get these things to scale? And we need to do two other things for that. And the first of them is we need government. Because we need to build a support system for those solutions to scale, which often means new policies, new incentives, new ways of funding, new change of regulation. But in order to do that, we cannot do that only once we have the prototype. When we define the problem, we also have to frame the problem and build an urgency for change with the different stakeholders. When we go through this process of co-creation, we also have to create a vision, a collective ambition. Where do we want to go to and why? And if we're prototyping, we really have to build the evidence. We have to evaluate our impact. Also to build our case to change policies and to lobby for policy formulation. And the third stream that we have to do is we have to build capacity for change. So we do not only have to develop solutions and work on policy change, but we have to build a movement of change makers alongside it. Then that starts often with the stakeholders that are closest to the system or to the problem at hand, and then reaching out to the innovators, the 2 to 5% of the people that they love change. You can wake them up in the night. Probably most of you are innovators. But let's be honest. We are only 2 to 5% of the people, and systems will not change if the discussion, if the conversation is only with us. And that happens a lot. We have to build that movement out to, first, the early adopters, the 15% of the people that say, well, I like change. That's fine, I'll play with you. But only if you help me, if you build a bit of a safety net for me to experiment. And then we have to bring it to the next stage, to the early majority, which is about a third of the people, and this is research done by Everett Rogers already in the 60s and replicated in the 80s and the 90s. And the early majority are the people that say, well, if you want me to change, you have to give me the tools. You have to give me the incentives. So basically what we have to do is we have to build out those solutions and make them easier applicable to larger amounts of people. And that's our responsibility as innovators to do that and to build that capacity for change. So basically that is what we call the periodic table of systems change. And that is how we see our role as the solutions lab, is to keep all those spades spinning. And sometimes other organizations will help us with that, hopefully. We cannot do that on our own. But in order to get systems change, all these plates have to be spinning. I'm deeply convinced of that. So where do we want to do that? There are 4 challenges that we want to focus on because, sorry, we cannot change all systems here in Canada. But there are 4 challenges that we see as important enough and where we think that as Solutions Lab we really can add value. And the first one is the future of health. And specifically chronic diseases. If you look at the health system, 55% of the health system, the costs are caused by chronic diseases, and that is growing dramatically. And that is going to be a problem. If this path is continuing, in a decade time, we will not have money to pay for education or social security or a good transport system because the health system is basically blowing up. And we have to curb that trend. And we've done some initial research, and of course this has been studied extensively already. But to us and to me, it was really healthy that the number one factor, especially here in Ontario, because Ontario scores even worse within Canada, and Canada is already number 35 out of 40 within the OECD on healthy eating. So that's the real one. So we have to change the behavior of people at the individual, at the community, at the systems level to make healthy eating the easy choice. And what we want to do as a lab is basically we're in the process of creating partnerships and finding 5 communities across the province, and in the next 5 years, in those communities, start to develop interventions to change and make healthy eating the easy choice, and measure what we do, and see what works, and what works we hope to scale to the rest of the province. And that's basically how we want to see if we can nail this in the next 5 to 10 years. Second one, it's related to that, is the future of food, which is one of the food sector is one of the biggest employers in Ontario and in North America. But is it really competitive in terms of export value? Canada is surpassed by many countries, among them, by the way, the Netherlands, who exports about twice in value what Canada does. Think about that. But also in terms of sustainability, other countries are ahead by a large margin. So for a healthy and more sustainable food economy, we need to change produce, processing, retailing. So our idea is to see if we can start to do that by looking at one value chain, which one we haven't selected yet, but meat, maybe fruits, and explore what can we do to promote a more sustainable and more healthy food economy, leading to better food and more jobs. The fourth is about the future of work and learning. So Canada, and this really struck me when we researched this initially, Canada has one of the best education systems in the world, and one of the most highest educated, if not the highest educated population. And still, your youth unemployment is a lot higher, and the labor participation rate, and that one really struck me, the labor participation rate of higher educated college and university degree is well below OECD average. There is fundamentally something wrong here. So are we preparing our youth for the 21st century jobs? Is our labor market ready for the changing nature of our economy? We want to develop solutions to increase the labor participation of youth. And it's starting with young people with disability as the most vulnerable, we think. And finally, our fourth challenge is the future of government, because we cannot have a strong knowledge society without a smart government. And if we can have a better government, I think we can attack a lot of the other challenges as well. And governments today face these complex challenges in a transforming world where public resources are decreasing. So we really have to fundamentally reform government, start to redesign public services. So that's what we plan to do in all kinds of different actions with local governments, provincial, federal. We had an organized GovMaker Day in November, which was a first attempt to create and connect the innovators inside and outside government with each other and debate the notion of open government. How can government connect much more with society to work together in solving some of these issues? And I think that we have to work on that continuously in the next years. And we will definitely not do that together. Solutions Lab will have a team, of course, and I'm very proud that we're building up the team very rapidly. And that team will not only consist of staff, but we will have secondments, we will have interns, so we'll really open for people to work with us. But we will also create partnerships. We already have partnerships with, of course, part of MaRS and the support of the Evans family. We have a partnership with the Ontario government, with the McConnell Foundation, Social Capital Partners, and many more to come. Because we cannot do this on our own. And we will build communities, like the GovMaker community, and we also intend to build learning communities about how to apply these lab methods, also in different challenges than the 4 that I just mentioned. And it all comes back to that, and it's sort of an invitation to help either the Solutions Lab on the challenges that we work, or to work on your own challenges, but basically answer the question for yourself. What kind of knowledge society do you want? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, so much for coming. I'm with Metro Morning at CBC Radio, and if this was the cocktail portion of the evening, I would probably start by saying to you, Joeri, how nice to meet you. What was your first impression of Toronto?
Well, I came in April, so that was still pretty warm. It's been a bit colder then. Well, I came I think in a fascinating time. I'm still very much learning about Toronto and about Canada. My initial impression is that Canadians are more European than they think and a bit more American than they want.
More European than they think. How so?
Well, what struck me, maybe it was also my own mistake, but I think that, for instance, the attitude of Canadians towards their government and the importance of organizing solidarity and having a public health system, for instance, is something that is, as a European, is very close to me, and I can see that.
And European because it's a little more collective?
Yeah.
And
I think you're less afraid of collectivity than the Americans, for instance.
And more American than we want to be?
I see, if I switch on, well, that's more your area, but if I switch on the television, I cannot distinguish almost what is Canadian or what is American. The sports market is totally integrated, so you can see that there's this huge American influence. But Canadians, I already found out, are very particularly proud that they're Canadian, that they're not American.
Yeah. One of the things that we think defines us is that we observe Americans and the Americans don't observe us. So There you go. That's a key distinction. You talked about, I want to tell you, since you're new here, I want to tell you a little bit about what I've come across as a reporter. You talked about the experience of the user being the way that you start reimagining how that these systems are starting to collapse because they're not really serving the user anymore. They've begun to serve the system or the institution. And I remember doing a story, this was the Indignity of Aging series that you mentioned, Tim, when I was talking to a woman about what happens when an elderly person has major surgery and gets sent home, that the home care team has no way of communicating with the team that did the surgery. And so when that person, which often happens, gets sick again because they haven't recovered from the surgery, they get sent not back to the same hospital or the same surgeon that did the surgery, but to a hospital that has a bed. And it was one of these things when she told me that, it was like the light going on. Well, that's a ridiculous way to treat a fragile elderly patient, the ones that cost the system so much, to waste surgery that they then can't recover from, right? And she talked about how the whole system would change if you looked at hospital care from the perspective of the user. She said, starting right from the parking lot, which in most hospitals are baffling places. So it was interesting when I did that. I wouldn't have known to call that systems thinking, but once I started understanding what you were doing here at MaRS, I understood that really is.
I think what we often forgot in those systems is to think about the first question, which is what kind of public value do we want to create? And then the second question is how can we do that in the best possible way, which is also accountable to the public that we use public money in a smart way. And what we
And the
what we-
public value here?
and what we see here is that the question about public value is actually gone, and only the question about transparency and accountability is driving the process, making that everybody is looking to its own institution and not to what that institution is actually creating in terms of public value.
And interesting, you said the other thing that has to happen is a pilot project. So in this case, a pilot project, I can't remember the details, involving one of the hospitals here and one of the surgeons, where the surgeon was actually going to begin to do some house visits to follow up on patients to track what the results were. Now that business of doing a pilot project, you said that is also critical. How is it different from the way we would have approached, trying to transform a system the way we'd done it, we would have done it earlier?
Yeah, so I think that and I don't know about Canada, but definitely can tell in the Netherlands there's a whole pilot industry. And basically, we design a pilot, we do the pilot, we finish the pilot, we maybe even evaluate the pilot, and then we go on to the next pilot. And I think what the difference is with the lab approach is that, what I said is it's a deliberate process to work towards skill. So you don't do a pilot just because you want to do a pilot. You do a pilot because you want to test it out. Does it work? And what does that mean if we scale that up? If we do not only one hospital where the doctor does house visit, but then we do that to find out how can we scale that to all the hospitals deliberately.
And I guess the other thing that changes with a pilot, right? I remember doing an interview once with Jennifer Keesmaat, who was in charge of New York City. What was she doing? Parks, I think. And she was, or transportation, it was transportation. She was trying to turn New York streets into more bicycle-friendly places. And she said, the way you do it, the way you take a lane, or take back a lane of the street for people, or take it back for bicycles, is that you put down some indoor-outdoor carpeting where once there was a car lane, you put up some chairs and tables, and you call it a pilot project. And she said that was the basis of how she was able to create change as quickly as she's done in New York. She said the pilot project was key because it wasn't trying to change the whole system at once.
No, but it was successful there, not just because it was a pilot project and then it stopped, but I think what she very smartly did was use that pilot to do two things. First, to gather evidence. So she used that pilot to gather evidence and to make her case to the city government that they should do this on a much larger scale. And secondly, to make it visible to society that it is possible, and she helped that to reach out to society and to actually build coalitions, not just in government, but in society with all kinds of organizations and individuals that wanted more bike lanes. And that is making that connection.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the coalitions, because, and I should just say, we'd love to have questions from the audience too. There are some mics set up here. So if you have a question, go to the mic. You don't have to listen to me ask questions forever. I'll throw one more at you. When I heard you were coming and I started reading a little bit about exactly what design thinking is, what it means to do systems change. It's almost as though the light bulb went on and suddenly you see it everywhere, right? So the Toronto Star today, I don't know how many of you saw this, but the TDSB worked with a developer to come up with a domed stadium for Central Tech. And lo and behold, the political representative, Adam Vaughan, didn't like the idea, and there was, you could hear the indignation on the part of the other officials in the story, that they had offered this project that was worth $6 million, and the councillor, the political representative, wasn't grateful for it. And it was one of those moments when I thought, well, of course not. They didn't pull anyone from the community, probably, into this discussion. It was as though suddenly I could see what the problem is. It's almost as though once the light goes on, you can't function the old way anymore, right?
And I think what this case also states is that you have to involve the stakeholders right from the start already when you're defining the problem and framing the problem. because I've seen it happen a lot that a small group of people did a very successful pilot project or they've developed a very good solution. But with the stakeholders, there was no sense of urgency. Yeah. So they didn't frame the problem. And framing the problem is, I think, a crucial success factor in creating that urgency for change.
And you know, I want to come to you in a minute. I promised I would, but now we get going on stories, right? I did an interview with John Campbell, Waterfront Toronto, and he talked about having a meeting. He's responsible for huge waterfront development. And his first community meeting, one of the women at the meeting, Cindy Wilkie, who was the head of the local citizens group, stood up in the meeting and said, "And what have you done to consult the stakeholders?" And he said, "Let me get back to you." And he said, as a developer, public meetings used to be his least favorite part of a project. And he said, because he was working with a citizens group that was really engaged and really knowledgeable, he said, they were the ones who ended up, and to your point that it has to be there at the beginning, he said, working with that group, the decisions were being made all collaboratively. He said at the end, the developer, or Waterfront Toronto rather, got to make the final decision. But people had been part of that discussion. And he said in the end, it was unique in his experience as a developer. It was the citizens who were at City Hall begging City Council to let the projects move forward because they didn't want to lose any more time. He said it transformed his understanding of what could happen in a public meeting. That must sound familiar to you.
Absolutely, but still that doesn't go far enough for me often. If I look at the notion of consultation, and earlier I said that one of the big challenges for government is to really start developing solutions with society instead of for society. Consultation not necessarily changes that, because consultation can often also be a government or a company asking, okay, please reach out and say something, but I'm still the solutions provider. I think one step further is, for instance, a local government that says, let's have a citizen budget, where citizens really decide on part of how the budget is being spent. That's going further than just consultation.
I understand.
So I think we have to push it a bit more.
Okay. Tell us who you are and your question.
I'm Melissa Karjanakis, and I'm a part of Studio Y, which is a new program here at MaRS. We're the first cohort of 26, young leaders from across Ontario who will be hopefully affecting some systems change. And my question is regarding a comment you made about redesigning the system for government and public worker retention. You mentioned education. And if we look at the Finnish example, with the highest student performance ratings worldwide, teachers must have master's degrees, are given more freedom with curriculum design, and as a profession are considered more prestigious than even physicians. This looks to me like positive reinforcement via monetary incentive and societal prestige. In a capitalist society, there are limitations. You cannot pay everyone a lot. Capitalism begets levels in society. As such, I don't think that positive reinforcement as a monetary incentive is sustainable. So do you think there's a different reason why the students are more successful in the Finnish system? If so, what is it? Or is there something about...
Just one, no double-barreled questions.
Okay.
What was the first part of it?
So do you think there's a different reason why the students in the Finnish system are more successful than this idea of capitalist positive reinforcement via monetary incentive?
Yeah, I don't, to be honest, to me, the Finnish education system and the Canadian are in many respects pretty similar. And I think that the position of teachers in this country is much better than in many European countries and comparable to, I would say, Finland. So I don't really know where I think the challenge is much more in the transition towards the labor market, if we talk about labor participation of young people, and it's about the content of the curriculum. And on the type of skills that we are, and the attitudes that we learn young people in order to prepare them for a job in the knowledge society, or a career, not a job, in the knowledge society.
I'm going to hold you at that question. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Paul Webster, a great storyteller, writes for Walrus Magazine, among other publications. Paul, your question.
It's nice to be introduced. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a science journalist, so I was, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It was really, really interesting, and I think the problems that you've chosen to tackle are tough ones, so good luck to you.
Thanks, please help me.
Yeah. Okay, I'm hired, is that right? It somewhat reminded me of the public interest research groups that used to exist on campuses when I was a student. I don't know if they still exist, but these were kind of think tanks where people would get together and brainstorm around ideas. Usually it was upper middle class white students sort of worrying about, how to solve racism in the poorer parts of town, and there was often a kind of disembodiment and sort of a distance between the researchers and the discussants and the people actually the subject of the discussion. I was really interested in your use of laboratory and the fact that you're using a kind of a kind of work model that you describe as a laboratory. And I always think of laboratories as quite hierarchical places. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the sort of structure of your laboratory and what the culture you want to create in that laboratory would be, and who would be invited to participate in it. Who will be the team members in these, I guess, multiple laboratories that you'll establish?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't think that I see the laboratory as it was 10, 20 years ago, as a closed unit of people and just some smart brains which you lock in a room and then you hope that something good will come out. I see the lab as much more as a network where there are some core people who perform them as nodes in the network, and we have a small but very diverse team. So I have a mathematician and I have a pharmacist and a social scientist and a public policy person in my team. So I think diversity is is key. And our role is mostly the role of convener and facilitator. So we have to reach out to all kinds of people and organizations in society around these challenges and bring them together in a process.
Why the word lab?
I think the word lab has come up because it is a space of experimentation and learning. And maybe not a physical space or a confined space, but it is a space where things can go wrong as long as we learn from it. So it's a space where we can test things out on a smaller scale before we do it on a larger scale.
That idea that everyone's involved before you actually know the outcome, right? Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you. And at this mic now, yes.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm also a fellow in Studio Y. I'm wondering, you're talking a lot about consultation with the public and designing with society and not for society. Considering that society is so full of diversity, how do you ensure that all of the voices at the table are being heard, particularly those who face barriers in terms of access?
That's a good question, and one that's tough to answer, especially and to do it, and probably we'll make a lot of mistakes with it as well, and then we'll have to step back and do it again or do it differently. But I think it starts with having an open mind, and for instance, in our work that we now do on food, we're interviewing a lot of people, and before doing that, we really had long discussions in the team to make sure that all our questions were open and not closed, allowing other perspectives to come in. And I think that is a very important quality that you start up, that you do not start with preconceived notions, that you already think that you have the solution. but you're really willing to listen. I think that is a start. It is very difficult, I think, to have everyone in the room, especially at the same time. I think actually that's not possible. But one of our design principles is that what we are looking for is the smallest possible intervention with the largest possible impact. So we do not try to get everybody in the room and then think that by doing that we will come up with a magic solution. We'll try to get people in the room to think about that question and then try to do it and learn from it and then build on that and move further.
Thank you so much. You know, the other thing that your question makes me think of is that we also hear that very often the solution that works for people with handicaps or some sort of accessibility issue actually turns out to be the solution that works best for everyone, right? So there's a lot to be gained.
And there is no magic bullet. Sometimes we have to develop different solutions for different groups of people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But those curbs that slant up we didn't used to build our curbs that way, right? But we did it for wheelchairs, and it turns out that they're also great for people on foot or people with strollers, all the rest of it. At this mic, yes.
Hi, my name is Peter Henderson from Ideovation. Again, great presentation. Thank you. My question is, how do you go about identifying what are the really big ideas that are going to make massive change to society? So balancing out getting the input from social input with moving the needle and making significant changes. And maybe another perspective would be engaging with consumers to change consumer mindsets. So there are some examples of some pilot projects, especially in Europe, going on around sustainability. And love to get your feedback on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Well, one of the things that we try to do is to look around, not just in Canada, but elsewhere, what has worked to move that needle. I think what our work also entails is it's sort of a constant search process for traction. Where can we find traction, and where can we build support systems for people that we think are developing exciting things? In a way, I believe then, those big ideas or those groundbreaking solutions will come forward if you build those solutions or those support systems. Go back, for instance, to the example that I gave on these digital media playgrounds. So what we didn't do is make a blueprint for how such a digital media center should look like. We built a support system for people to create their own. And we were very surprised with the solutions that people came up with. And then we built a sharing platform where they could share those solutions with each other. And they came up with much better solutions than we could have ever imagined before. And I think that is the difference in approach that we try to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to borrow a term that we use in our story meetings here. We're down to minute territory. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people, and how much time do we have left? There were 8? We have 20 minutes? Oh, well, we can still relax, but I'm going to ask you to knock off some of these questions quickly in case there are some other people.
All right. Hi, I'm Sarah Grant with EWB Canada, and also was fortunate enough to be one of the, second cohorts of SIG's graduate diploma in social innovation. And my question is around scoping. So first, I really enjoyed sort of the 4 areas that the MaRS Lab is gonna take on. And I'm asking about scoping because I've seen both with EWB, an organization that sort of takes a systems approach, and with the applied projects we took with our diploma program, that scoping seemed to be one of the issues that we faced, and sort of for us, in both cases, it's been about trying to narrow the problem enough that it sort of incites action and brings on passion and excitement, and I felt like the 4 that you shared did, and yet not too narrow so that you can still see sort of the forest for the trees. So I'd love to hear maybe like an anecdote or some insights that you gained through the exercise of coming up with those 4 areas.
Scoping, I have not
Yeah.
heard that as a...
No, scoping the problem is indeed an important part of the process. And for instance, if you take the future of health, that has been one where we discussed the scope extensively. Where we say, well, looking at the future of health, we want to look at chronic disease. So, yeah, you could scope it by taking let's take diabetes. We chose not to go that route. We started to look at risk factors. And I said, well, if we take one of the main risk factors, maybe that is the right scope to start to test it out. Knowing that, I mean, the other risk factors for chronic disease, tobacco, smoking, alcohol, fitness, stress are important too. And other organizations are working on that, and they should. But we felt that unhealthy eating for us was the one that we could provide the most value, and where we think that we can have the smallest possible interventions with the largest possible impact. And I think it's also that realization of knowing that you cannot do everything, but where can you be most effective? Where is your intervention have the most impact?
Yeah, you said, thank you so much.
Yeah,
you said earlier that one of the issues is that we have this giant food terminal here, but a lot of what we're doing is shipping our food into the U.S. and then where it's processed, and then we're buying it back. That's the kind of system that you're going to tackle here. Amazing.
Hi, my name is Ashley Good. I run an organization called Fail Forward, which is dedicated to creating a space for failure so that learning and innovation may thrive. My question for you today is that it's been my experience that there is no such thing as a silver bullet, especially when trying to create systems level change. So I'm curious from your experience, what have you seen that has to go along with these innovation labs and these ideas that are coming out of it to allow them to scale, or do you have hypotheses on that?
And how the labs scale, or the solutions that come out?
The solutions that come out of the labs.
Yeah, so I think if you want the solutions to scale, I think you have to basically build that support and learning system, and that's what I spoke about, talking about policy change and building capacity for change with people. And if you don't build those support and learning systems, it becomes very hard to scale. So to me, that is crucial. And I think especially learning is often not seen as an instrument of scaling. But in my experiences is that learning is sometimes much more effective as scaling, if you can learn others how to do things differently.
Interesting to pick up, thank you so much. Interesting to pick up on your earlier example of learning to do this in Amsterdam when you said, you know, you were offered the money to start 15 centers, but instead you invited all the community groups to propose how they might get involved. You supplied the software, right, and support, and you ended up having how many centers? 430. 430. So somehow the answer to that question about scale lies in that, right?
Yep.
When you bring people in and you let them take the idea and do with it what they feel they're capable of, you've already started to really build a very reliable network, because you're not asking people to take on things that they know they can't do. Yep. They know far better than you what's possible in their system. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne Miller. I'm with the City of Toronto, so I'm glad you talked a lot about government today. And working in government, I have to say that we're not known as the most innovative places, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. I'm not going to say that's 100% accurate, but it's certainly not 100% false. And I'm just wondering, how would you propose Or how do you plan to engage governments in the process of innovation? How do you bring them to this table? In a way, it's their table anyway.
Sorry, what's that? How do you bring?
How do you convince governments about the importance of innovation?
Okay.
Well, I think that, so the first thing that we started out to do with organizing this GovMaker Day in November is, that was for us an attempt to find the innovators in government. Basically by organizing a conference and saying to civil servants, well, please join up. And we had over 250 of them in this room discussing and brainstorming with each other, how can we make government more open? So in a way, it's a seduction strategy. And trying to seduce civil servants to come out and play with us.
But you also said, interesting, thank you so much. You also said to me when we were talking yesterday that one of the issues is that people don't want to join government, that this is a huge issue because it takes so long to get things done.
Yeah, I think that is, for government, that is one of the major challenges moving forward. Is government as an organization attractive enough for new generations to be an employer?
Because at one time, actually, the city of Toronto was known as one of the most innovative governments before amalgamation. It was considered a place where young policymakers really wanted to work because it was a small enough scale you could actually make things happen.
I think in New York, one thing that Mayor Bloomberg did there is that a lot of people wanted to work for the New York government. Because you want to work for that kind of money.
I'm confident that one day we will be back there in this city as well, and so glad that you're along to help us get there. Yes.
Hi there. My name's Jacob Catalano. And my question was that in your talk, you mentioned a lot about the transition into the knowledge economy. But I'm not really a part of your generation. I'm born in 1994. So my real question is...
What was the cutoff? 89?
89.
So like 5 years out of that. And my question was...
You're really it. So,
yeah. So what I'm most curious about is the ways I can leverage my knowledge and that sort of thing. I want to apply all this knowledge I've grown up with. So what are your thoughts on the ways I can best apply this, or ways that my generation can really go about leveraging all this knowledge that we've grown up with?
Can I ask you another question first? What did you say this generation was going to, its legacy would be?
Well, I wasn't really sure.
You had that little
chat? They created
chat?
everything for us. They more like, I think they created the infrastructure for us. Now,
no, that was the baby boomers.
Well,
this one was the next one.
The infrastructure I'm talking about is the internet. Like, I've always grown up with it. I've always had it. And like that's the most important thing to me. That's where I get all my knowledge. If I need anything, I have my phone, I can just, that's my infrastructure.
Okay, sorry, I hijacked you there. Your question was, again, what?
The ways I can best leverage all this knowledge.
All this knowledge,
well,
yes.
One of them is the
they
internet.
They have too much, is my opinion.
Yeah, so how you can leverage that knowledge, one of them is the internet and using those tools. And I think that your generation is best equipped and knows best how to use those tools in a productive way. And if you can teach some of the generations before you how to do that, that will be I would be most grateful.
Maybe less ego. Maybe your generation will solve the problem of too much ego in a room. You'll be so collective.
We'll try.
That you won't get much practice with forming very large. Thank you so much. Yes.
I'd like to welcome you to Toronto. My name is Ryan Collins. I'm a student at the Ivey Business School in London, Ontario. And in about 5 days, I'll be headed to Rotterdam to study in the Netherlands at their School of Management. And before, I'd like to preface my question with a poll of the audience. Who here uses the Toronto Public Library, has a library card? Raise your hand. Isn't that incredible? So I'd like to know your perspective on the library and how you can involve this. You brought up two things, which were government and learning, two of your four proponents. So how do you see libraries changing systems, both maybe in your history in Europe, and how do you see that coming to Toronto? Because it's a really important part of our community.
Good question.
Here.
Yeah,
absolutely. And
we're proud of our library here, by the way.
Yeah, and one that in the Netherlands, I did a lot of work with public libraries, and they are one of the the most beautiful social innovations. It was Benjamin Franklin in 1731 who had a couple of books and wondered, but how do people have access to this knowledge? And he started to share his books with people who didn't have those books, and that became the Library of Congress and was the first public library. In the Netherlands, we did several projects to help change public libraries from buildings with books, which are sort of vaults with lots of knowledge, to institutions that help to actually provide a much wider access to knowledge, not just to the building, but to the knowledge that is available. Because that, I think, in essence, is the function of a public library. It's not the building with the books and making sure that they are preserved, but it's about organizing the public access to knowledge, which I think is what a public library is about.
Yeah, I'd like to say that just the question before that brought up the internet is the new knowledge. So what we're trying to do at the library and what's opening this month is a digital innovation hub.
Nice. Get in the plug.
Well, no, like I'd like to hear your perspective on how
You know what,
this-
I'm going to hold you to one
Sure.
question there, but thank you. And
Okay.
thank you for coming to speak for the library. Yeah. You know, I did an interview once with this homeless guy on my street, guy who panhandles. Maybe he's not homeless. And the grocery store where he panhandles is right across from the library. And I remember talking to him about the library. There was a strike and he couldn't get into the library. And I said, you know, do you ever go to the library? And he said, yeah. He said, I always use it for the bathroom. And he said, now I have to go all the way to wherever he was staying to use the bathroom. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? The library is the one place where this guy can go and use a washroom without having to buy a cup of coffee or whatever. It was those little moments. And of course, you see homeless people sometimes sitting in the, reading the papers in the library. It's a great institution.
And also watch out for preconceptions. I have one of the people in my team, her thesis was about the use of mobiles by homeless people. And most homeless people have a mobile because
so interesting.
That's one of the crucial things they need to organize their life and to actually communicate with official agencies.
Oh, that's so interesting. All kinds of possibilities there, eh? Yeah.
Exactly.
Your question.
Hi, my name is Emma Sobel. I work for a small firm called the Institute of Cultural Affairs, and I'm a member of the innovation community, I guess, here in Toronto, which means I've had the opportunity to interact with the people at MaRS over about a year now, and my impressions are it's this very highly educated, talented group of people at what's becoming quite a prominent institution. And I'm wondering if you've given any thought to the perceived class imbalance that could arise when you're out of the lab working with your real stakeholders and what issues that might raise and what you might do about it.
That's a very good question. And it's definitely a danger for both the Solutions Lab, but maybe even for MaRS itself, if it's going to be seen as an elite institution, only for a certain class. And I think even more widely, and we had a nice discussion with the Studio Y folks this afternoon as well, the notion of the Knowledge Society. I don't see the Knowledge Society as only the people who are higher educated. The Knowledge Society is the concept for the entire society. Everyone is in that Knowledge Society and feels that they're in the Knowledge Society. For instance, with the Future of Health, those 5 communities that we really want to get out of the building and pick 5 communities across the province and learn how they are doing things and work with them together and not be in this building only.
Thank you. We have 4.5 minutes, so time maybe for a couple of more questions. Let's see how much we get.
Thank you.
That means Joeri, short answers.
Yeah.
My name is David Irwin. I work with media companies and startups and on collaborative communications and knowledge sharing. And one word that's often thrown at me all the time now is we want to be innovative. We want to, shake up our system. And then I see these, they open up labs and idea centers, and what comes out of that usually is the same old stuff. So a lot of companies now are creating these own labs within their structures, and I'm just wondering what your recommendations for traditional companies, if they're creating these innovation labs, what should their founding principles be?
Yeah, if those innovation labs or units or spaces are only scapegoats for not changing everything, my recommendation would be close them tomorrow. And good luck. I think if you want to use labs as for instance as a company or these notions as a tool to, for instance, really understand the user and apply certain methods to interact with users to develop new products or services, I think it could be very valuable. But that sometimes will also mean kill your own darlings, and you have to be willing to do that. And if you're not willing to do that, don't do it, but good luck.
That's what they always say in writing workshops. Be prepared to kill your darlings. What's your question?
My name
Thank
is
you.
Michael Hartman. I'm interested in the sort of the slide masthead that says global leadership. And as an educator, and a business school educator, I'm very interested in understanding what are the leadership capabilities we need to develop that are conducive to supporting systems change. And I want your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Wow. Well, I think that if you, and so he has a very difficult name, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi,
Nicely done.
the author of Flow and Creativity, has thought a lot about the process of innovation as well, and basically divided it in 3 stages. The first stage is really deeply understanding the problem, and the second one is creating an open environment to experiment, and the third stage is getting the new solution accepted by peers. Because only when a new solution is being accepted as better, we really have innovation. And I think the capabilities that we need is exactly to do those things. We need capabilities to deeply understand the problem. We need capabilities to understand, to experiment and learn. And we need capabilities to help convince our peers and get new ideas accepted.
Thank you. I think we can get these last 2 questions in. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Lurie, and I've been working for the Canadian Mental Health Association and been working with people here at MaRS to try and create some innovative thinking around social finance to deal with issues like homelessness. And I was interested in your comment earlier about how do you seduce government, because it seems to me that we will be able to, based on, for example, the at-home Chez Soi project that the Mental Health Commission do, create a good model for supportive housing and social finance and bring the private sector in. But what they found is that while they got good clinical results, there weren't sufficient offsets in the total population to justify government going to scale. So when you get, so I guess the question is, in some cases, government will need to be convinced that the successful innovation is more than just expenditure offsets. And do you see that as a challenge for scaling?
No,
In 30 seconds?
In 30 seconds. And that's why we, right from the start, have to build the urgency for change and really work in stating the case and convincing, campaigning. And for me, that policy change is about campaigning to create support for change. And if you don't do that, indeed, you can come up with new solutions, but they will drop that.
So it's redefining the outcomes beyond cost savings?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yes,
Hello.
our last question.
I'm Joeri Rose-Tan. I'm with the Institute for Knowledge, Innovation, and Technology. And my lab team, we work with the idea of knowledge building. So I guess we believe that if we put ideas in a community, we can have sustainable idea improvement. And one of the problems that we're finding is that there's actually almost too many ideas. And the focus for the problem has become lost. So I was wondering, could you talk more about the framing of the problem and kind of effective steps for doing that?
The framing of the problem, maybe we'll just, can you take
Yeah,
one piece
no,
of
well,
that?
very shortly, I think we touched a bit on it earlier. There are, by definition, always too many ideas. And I think the challenge is, can we look for those ideas where we think that we will have, with the least amount of cost and energy, the largest possible impact? And then we can only find that out by testing it out and gather the evidence, if that so is, before we go to large scale. And I think that is indeed, that's the process that we're in. Selecting ideas, testing it out. Is it really working? If so, scale it up.
Yeah, the big battle over ideas. Thank you so much. You know, Tim Draymond, when we had our little session there about what the next generation will, about what that generation will give as its legacy, you said it was the turnaround. You thought it was going to be the turnaround generation. I'm going to throw it back to you at this point, Tim.
That's right. I thought it was going to be the turnaround generation, and I think this evening, for me, was really a wonderful example of having a really stimulating discussion about really important issues. And I think the issues are that we face these enormous system challenges. All of our systems are really becoming very frayed around the edges. And some of them have imperatives related to them, especially the ecological ones. And so the work that Joeri and his team and the people at MaRS are doing, and all the other people working in this design field around social innovation, I think it's really, really important for us to be able to create the opportunity for us to actually fast track the changes that we need. We can't take 300 years to bring about a lot of these changes. We need to do it in 30. And Joeri mentioned Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin, 1731, invented the public lending library, but it was an orphan. As a social innovation, it was an orphan. It took 170 years before Andrew Carnegie built over 2,000 libraries across North America and turned it into a system. And he took the keys in each of those libraries that he constructed, and he passed the keys to City Hall. And so the taxpayer has been paying for libraries, and that's fabulous. But we need so many social innovations going forward. We won't be able to always pass the key to City Hall. So the question I had for Joeri, but we don't have the time, is how do we create a diversified financial strategy to be able to fund all the fabulous social innovations that people in this audience and people in the generation that Joeri was talking about, and the next generation that's also here, are going to be building. So thank you all. Those were great questions on a fabulous presentation by Joeri, organized by Mary, with so many penetrating questions to really kind of unwrap it and get it going. Will you join with me in thanking Mary and Joeri for organizing this meeting? Thank you.